Crisis of Health, Part 3, and we're going to take a look at the biblical quarantine. And we're going to see from the Bible that there were important measures that God instructed the Israelites to take as they were confronted by infectious diseases. And we are going to see and understand that those measures are very exemplary for us to follow in this modern generation. And we are going to see that the position of the priests in the nation of Israel as the people of God at that time was a very important position. They not only instructed the people regarding the moral law of God and how to keep it, but the priests were the ones who were responsible for instructing the people in the laws of health. So in this we understand that the Bible gives a connection between our health and our spirituality, and they are connected, and this is why the priests were identified by God as the ones responsible for administering the examination and the investigation of infectious cases, and the ones who were responsible for giving the all clear or confining them to isolation if they did have the infectious diseases. And even in our day to day, as we are dealing with a quarantine, a global quarantine where self-isolation is being recommended for at least a period of 14 days, we're going to see that this 14-day period is highly biblical. It was recognized and recommended by God. And so when people say that the Bible is not a scientific book, sometimes we have to look again and look a little higher, or we have to look again and look a little deeper, beloved, because the principles of health and the principles of life that are contained therein are solid foundational principles. And so even now, people in the world, they are complaining, especially church folk, that their churches should not be shut down as a result of a virus or as a result of this global pandemic. Beloved, just be at peace, because this is God's design, that we do the things that are necessary, practically necessary, to maintain and preserve our health. And we're going to see that this 14-day isolation, this is a biblical principle in the face of infectious diseases. So let not your heart be troubled. It is not taking anything from church, it's not taking anything from your spirituality to isolate yourself or to be in a state of self-isolation or quarantine for a period of time, so as to preserve your health, preserve the health of others, and to preserve the stability of society. So go with me, beloved, in the book of Leviticus. And in the book of Leviticus, we're going to read from chapter 13. And we're going to see what was God's recommendations in dealing with infectious cases. And specific to this instance, it is going to be leprosy. And so we're going to read his precious instruction that he is giving to Moses and Aaron on how to identify and how to quarantine and deal with leprosy in the different ways it presented itself, because leprosy presented itself in different ways. And again, beloved, it shows that there is a connection between our health and our spirituality, because it is the priests who are conducting these examinations. And it shows that the Israelites, they were given a very advanced system of health and understanding regarding the laws of health. And this is why Naaman had to leave Syria to come over to Israel. God gave the Israelites a method and a means in treating and combating diseases. Everything was not answered by prayer. Everything was not answered by getting on your knees. You need the appropriate measures and medicines that are germane to the situation that you are going through when it comes to infection and diseases, beloved. And so do not think that it is a denial of your faith to reach for nature's remedial agencies. Do not think that it's a denial of your faith to reach out for the conventional medicines that have great value, because not all are valuable and not all natural remedies supposedly are valuable as well. And so you have to find the thing that answers to your situation and brings about the state of healing, beloved. We do not want to be fanatic and then stay in our corners or expose ourselves needlessly to disease and expose ourselves needlessly to others and then infect them, or we ourselves be infected. So we have to take the appropriate measures and countermeasures to preserve the health of our persons, the health of our homes, our families, and our society. So God expects us to be realistic and practical. So let's read. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man shall have in the skin of his flesh a rising, a scab, or a bright spot, and it be in the skin of his flesh like the plague of leprosy, then he shall be brought unto Aaron the priest, or unto one of his sons the priest. And the priest shall look on the plague in the skin of the flesh. And when the hair in the plague is turned white, and the plague in sight be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a plague of leprosy. And so if the plague is on his skin and the hairs within that spot on his skin is turned white, and that spot has sunken deeper in his flesh, it was leprosy. And notice what was the responsibility of the priest. And the priest shall look on him. And so, beloved, these are things that we need to understand how God works. And he works in practical fashion. The man did not come, the individual did not come to the priest, and then the Lord spoke to the mind of the priest and say, yes, this person had leprosy. No, the priest had to go through a process of elimination to determine the symptoms, to see if they match the manifestation or the presentation of this disease. So God is a practical God, and he wants us to be a practical, realistic, non-fanatical people, beloved. So do not expect that God is going to impress the answer on your mind. You must be able to weigh and deal with the evidence that is presented before you to make a determination of what you have and what is the best move or path forward. And when the hair in the plague is turned white and the plague in sight be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a plague of leprosy, and the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. And so if the bright spot be white in the skin of his flesh, and in sight be not deeper than the skin, and the hair thereof be not turned white, then the priest shall shut up him that hath the plague 7 days. And so if, as the individual presents themselves to the priest, who also was the doctor, when they present themselves to the priest and the identifying characteristics are not clear, along with the first ones that went before, he is going to quarantine him for 7 days to give the disease, if it is, time to manifest, time to grow, time to progress, so that a proper determination can be made. And verse 5 says, and the priest shall look on him the 7th day, and behold, if the plague in his sight be at a stay, and the plague spread not in the skin, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days more. And so the priests were able to recognize by God allowed them to understand that there is going to be a special incubation incubation time period for the disease to manifest himself so that you can be able to make the right determination. So the Israelites were not careless in their handling of disease patients. And so this, beloved, is a scientific process that the Bible is here laying out to determine whether or not a person had a leprosy. Verse 6, and the priest shall look on him again the seventh day, and behold, if the plague be somewhat dark, and the plague spread not in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. And so after that gestation period, as it were, after that incubation period, the priest would have been able, if there are no changes or if there were not specific changes, to make the pronouncement whether this person is clean or unclean. It is but a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But verse 7 says, if the scab spread much abroad in the skin, after that he hath been seen of the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen of the priest again if the scab spread. And so the priest then would have given him instructions that if this situation changes, you need to come back to me for follow-up treatment. And if the priest see that, behold, verse 8, the scab spreadeth in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. So God is here saying that there is a maximum 3-week incubation period for the leprosy to manifest. So the fail-safes were used so that the Israelite population would not have been needlessly affected and infected, and therefore the quarantine was necessary. But even after the quarantine, there was a follow-up, beloved. So we must understand that the way that God did things when it came to infectious diseases was thorough. But why didn't he impress the priest and tell him this person has leprosy? He did not need to do that because he gave them guidelines to follow, beloved. And so the guidelines that your governments and your health institutions are giving, so as to of self-isolation and observing the laws and the rules of cleanliness, do not be presumptuous, beloved, and break these guidelines. Follow them. They are for your own good, and they are for society's good. We do not live or operate in a vacuum by ourselves. And so as social creatures, you know what? Right now, it is actually best to practice social distancing. And we can go on and on in Leviticus chapter 13, and we can determine, we can read and be able to see the set determinations that would have been able to distinguish whether or not a person had leprosy. And it continues to go on, beloved. You can there were even different rules to determine leprosy manifesting in different places on the skin, in the beard, as bright spots on the garments, and in the home. And if it was in the beard, verse 29 of Leviticus chapter 13 said, if a man or woman have a plague upon the head or the beard, then the priest shall see the plague, and behold, if it be in sight deeper than the skin, so that one identifying characteristic is there, that sunken flesh, and there be in it a yellow thin hair. This here is yellow and not white as in the previous. Then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a dry scald, even a leprosy upon the head or beard. So the leprosy had a different manifestation based upon the locations of the body. So as the leprosy presented upon the flesh, based upon the difference in location, it would have determined what kind of leprosy or what strain of leprosy it was. So God gave the priest several determining markers so that they would know how to correctly identify infectious diseases that would have needed to be quarantined. Verse 31, and if the priest look on the plague of the scald, and behold, it be not in sight deeper than the skin, and that there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall shut him up that hath the plague of the scald 7 days. So if his natural, the color of his hair was not existing in the spot that came up on the skin, he would have been quarantined, because the absence of that hair or the discoloration of that hair showed whether or not it was leprosy or what kind of leprosy it was. And so he's now shut up for 7 days, quarantine. This is the biblical quarantine. And in the 7th day the priest shall look on the plague, and behold, if the scald spread not, and there be in it no yellow hair, and the scald be not in sight deeper than the skin, he shall be shaven, but the scald shall he not shave, and the priest shall shut him up that hath the scald 7 days more. So this is now again the 14-day marker for the biblical quarantine. And in the 7th day the priest shall look on the scald, and behold, if the scald be not spread in the skin, nor be in sight deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. So if there's no yellow hair, or even no black hair, but the scald does not spread, brother was pronounced unclean. What was he supposed to do? He was to wash his clothes and be clean. But notice verse 35 says, but if the scald spread much in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall look on him, and behold, if the scald be spread in the skin, the priest shall not seek for yellow hair. He is unclean. So if it starts to spread, we know that he's unclean, even though he may not have been seeing the yellow hair. The spreading of this particular presentation of leprosy showed or confirmed that it was leprosy. But if the scald be in his sight at a stay, that means it does not spread, and that there is black hair grown up therein. So you know that the Israelites, they were black-haired people, and that there is black hair grown up therein. The scald is healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. So if when he presented himself to the priest at the presentation, with the presentation of his spot in his skin, and there was no black hair in it, but and he was shut up on quarantine for the 14 days, if the black hair grew back in the spot, the priest knew that once this hair grew back, those follicles were not destroyed, the root of them were not destroyed, he does not have leprosy. And so this is very deep, and I would love a doctor to go through this here, explaining physiologically, anatomically, why this is so. This is very interesting, beloved. So God had his markers to determine whether or not this person had leprosy. So it was not just magic. I hate when people say that science must be separated from the Bible. Beloved, if this was not scientific, what God is telling the priest, I don't know what is, because this is a clear means to determine whether or not this person had an infectious disease. And it goes on, but let us skip a few points and let us look at leprosy in the garments. And so we're going to see that the leprosy could have spread from the person to the garments as well. So in Leviticus chapter 13 verse 47, it says, the garment also that the plague of leprosy is in, whether it be a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it be in the warp or woof of linen or of woolen, warp or woof meaning the instruments that they use to make the garment itself, whether it was of linen or of woolen, whether in a skin, remember they use the animal skins as garments, or in anything made of skin. And if the plague be greenish or reddish in the garment or in the skin, either in the warp or in the woof or in anything of skin, it is a plague of leprosy and shall be shewed unto the priest. So if you had this discoloration of those garments on the color, with the colors of green or red in any woolen, linen or skin garment, it was a plague of leprosy. And so however the virus or the bacteria interacted with the fibers on the material, or fibers of the material, it would have discolored it in this particular fashion, beloved. And so it was a clear identifying mark or characteristic that this was leprosy, and it was taken to the priest. And verse 50 says, and the priest shall look upon the plague and shut up it that hath the plague 7 days. So even the garment was shut up for 7 days, so that this priest can determine how this plague is behaving, if it is the plague or not. And he shall look on the plague on the 7th day. If the plague be spread in the garment, either in the warp, or in the woof, or in a skin, or in any work that is made of skin, the plague is a different kind of leprosy. It's called a fretting leprosy. It is unclean. He shall therefore burn that garment, whether warp or woof, in woolen or in linen, or anything of skin wherein the plague is, for it is a fretting leprosy, it shall be burnt in the fire. And so this is why we receive the different time periods that the coronavirus lives outside of the body when it lands on fabric, fibers, metal, wood surfaces. So the priest is doing a similar test, as it were, to determine what this thing is. And he shall look on the plague on the 7th day. If the plague be spread in the garment, either in the warp, or in the woof, or in the skin, or in any work that is made of skin, the plague is a fretting leprosy, it is unclean. He shall therefore burn that garment, whether warp or woof, in woolen or in linen, or anything of skin wherein the plague is, for it is a fretting leprosy, it shall be burnt with fire. And if the priest shall look, and behold, the plague be not spread in the garment, either in the warp, or in the woof, or in anything of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing wherein the plague is, and he shall shut it up 7 days more, because perhaps it could have been just a fungus or mold growing on the garment. So the time period was essential. Verse 55, and the priest shall look on the plague after that it is washed, and behold, if the plague have not changed his color, and the plague be not spread, it is unclean. Thou shalt burn it in the fire. It is a fret inward, whether it bear within or without. So it's going now into the deeper parts of the fibers. So if it remains with the same color. And if the priest look and behold the plague be somewhat dark after the washing of it, then he shall rend it out of the garment, or out of the skin, or out of the warp, or out of the woof. And if it appear still in the garment, either in the warp, or in the woof, or in anything of the skin, it is a spreading plague. Thou shalt burn that wherein the plague is with fire. And so when he separated the garment, and it still was dark, even after washing, and he separated it, and it still maintained that dark color, it meant that the leprosy had permeated the fibers of the garment. This was to be burnt with fire. And so it continues, and the garment either warp or woof, or whatsoever thing of skin it be, which thou shalt wash. If the plague be departed from them, then it shall be washed the second time, and it shall be clean. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in a garment of woolen or linen, either in the warp or woof, or anything of skins, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. So there was laws governing how they were to approach the handling of infectious diseases. So this was the system of health that the Israelites had based upon obedience to the laws of health and administered by the priest. But notice, so we see the leprosy could be in the skin, the leprosy could be in the head, the bald head, or in the beard, in the hair, and the leprosy could be in a garment. Leprosy could have spread in a home. Whatever the case was, beloved, there was a quarantine time period and necessary washings. Now, these weren't ceremonial washings, these were necessary washings. So you bathing twice a day, every day, or at least once a day is not a ceremonial washing. That is a necessary washing. You washing your hands after you come into contact with people or things or places is a necessary washing. It's for the sake of cleanliness. So leprosy could have been in the homes as well. So when you read In Leviticus chapter 14, from verse 34 rather, it says, when ye be come into the land of Canaan, which I give to you for a possession, and I put the plague of leprosy in a house of the land of your possession, and he that owneth the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, it seemeth to me there is, as it were, a plague in the house. Then the priest shall command that they empty the house. Before the priest go into it, see the plague. Before the priest go into it to see the plague, that all that is in the house be not made unclean. And afterward the priest shall go in to see the house, and he shall look on the plague, and behold, if the plague be in the walls of the house with hollow strakes, and so it manifests, it presents in a particular fashion with hollow strakes, and notice the greenish or the reddish color. And so while on the human skin it was manifesting as bright spots, sunken with yellow hair or sometimes white hair coming out of them, but when it manifested or presented on garments or on materials, it was greenish and reddish in color, which in sight are lower than the wall, so it had a tendency to be recessed. Then the priest shall go out of the house to the door of the house and shut up the house. How many days, beloved? 7 days quarantine, biblical quarantine. And the priest shall come again the 7th day and shall look. And behold, if the plague be spread in the walls of the house, then the priest shall command that they take away the stones in which the plague is, and they shall cast them into an unclean place without the city, and he shall cause the house to be scraped within round about, and they shall pour out the dust that they scrape off without the city into an unclean place. And so it was separated from the home, put outside of the city where it did not come into contact with people, with human beings, so as to infect the population. This was the protective measure. And he shall cause the house to be scraped within round about, and they shall pour out the dust that they scrape off without the city into an unclean place. And they shall take other stones and put them in the place of those stones, and he shall take other mortar and shall plaster the house. And if the plague come again and break out in the house, after that he hath taken away the stones, and after he hath scraped the house, and after it is plastered, then the priest shall come and look, and behold, if the plague be spread in the house, it is a fretting leprosy in the house, it is unclean. And he shall break down the house, the stones of it, and the timber thereof, and all the mortar of the house, and he shall carry them forth out of the city into an unclean place. Beloved, you may be living in an environment, in a home, which is making you sick. You may be living under a roof that is infected with, whether it is mold, black mold, or some disease, some condition, and it makes you sick. And this is why in our present modern day era, houses are no longer having asbestos, and when asbestos is revealed to be in a dwelling, the men come in with their hazmat gear and they remove the asbestos because it can give you cancer. What is it? Mesothelioma. And so, beloved, you can have all kind of health conditions coming from your home. Your home can make you sick. Beloved, you must open up your homes, let the free flesh flowing pure air flow through, so that the air can be, the home in the air inside of the home can be purified, so that you will not be incubating disease or infection. And so, beloved, we recognize that the quarantine that people are experiencing, that have been recommended for 14 days, is biblical, because you're safeguarding your personal health, the health of your family members, and society at large. This is a biblical principle, and the Israelites observed these principles when they dealt with the cases of infectious diseases as it manifested in leprosy. And so these are things that we must take consideration of. Don't kick against the pricks, beloved. These things are necessary measures so as to protect, to preserve your health. So understand that the principles that God have given us, they are solid, foundational, enduring principles, thousands and thousands of years old, and regardless of years old, they are necessary for as long as we live, because this is how life is, and these are the things necessary to preserve life. I pray that this has been a blessing to you. Share it with your friends, your family, your neighbors. Let them see that God is strict when it comes to preserving your health, and God goes about things in a very scientific manner so that you can be positively sure that you are going to be able to make the best choices to preserve your health. This is the Word of Life with Andre Knight.